but I'm gonna go ahead and try this argument on like I try on a fancy hat, and I want you to tell me how it looks on me. This is episode 37 of Farm to Markets, and today we are talking about if unions are still useful, if student loans should be forgiven, and we have more lightning round questions at the end. On April 1st, Amazon employees on Staten Island voted in favor of forming a union, despite aggressive attempts by the company to block its formation. While many think this is the best for Amazon employees, some believe that in the long run, a union will end up hurting employees, sparking a debate about whether unions are still useful. Alex, do you think unions are still useful?
In theory, yes, unions are still useful. It's a way for employees to band together and use, I guess, collective action to try and get themselves better pay or better benefits or whatever. So from that standpoint, yeah, they are still useful. I think in a lot of cases, modern day unions kind of forgot what they exist for. They seem today to be more about climate marches and social issues than they do actually trying to negotiate a new labor contract for their members. That to me, though, seems more on the white or pink collar union side. As far as blue collar unions go, like the Amazon union, I think you're probably going to see them somewhat resurgent in importance and usefulness as even mainstream economists are now saying we're entering an era of deglobalization. More and more blue collar work is coming back to the United States. A lot more things are going to be shipped within the United States. So not just Amazon warehouse workers, but warehouse workers across, various industries, industrial workers across various industries. I think they're going to find themselves all of a sudden no longer ignored by both political parties, but being actively courted by both political parties. And that will make them more relevant and useful once again.
So the question was, are unions still useful?
Yes.
I guess kind of like Alex said, I think they're useful to a certain group of workers, but I think they're pretty much useless to everyone else, including the greater economy. Now, I'm treading carefully because I don't want to be offensive to people that do like unions. I'll just say that personally, I'm not wired to be a union worker, just like I'm not wired to like the taste of cilantro. That's just the way I am. I spent 4 years as a member of the Brotherhood of the Railroad's signalman for the railroad, and it was disheartening to see how the union caused a terrible working environment. Here's the overarching problem with unions is they focus more on helping employees from getting fired, and they spend less focus on facilitating the advancement of high quality workers. Unions couldn't care less about good workers. Like the phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Unions are great if you're a squeaky wheel. As a result, higher quality workers tend to find better employment elsewhere where their skills and ability are recognized. And over time, this tends to skew the balance of the good to bad worker ratio. The union I left was kind of like the island of misfit toys. There was a guy on my signal crew that got busted for smoking crystal meth on the job. Now, this guy's responsible for directing the traffic of freight trains. So in my mind, he should be unceremoniously fired. But the union wouldn't let those evil, greedy employers rob him of his God-given right to work at that company. Like I said earlier, unions are useful for some people. If you're generally happy where you're at, if you dislike your boss and you have no intention of seeking better employment, then unions are pretty good deal. But economically, I'm a fan of the free market theory. If an employer is bad, leave. If an employee is bad, fire them. I don't think America needs babysitters in every business.
The question is, are unions still useful? My first question is that when were they useful and who were they useful to? I guess if you're the Democrats and you're looking at a really, really horrible midterm election outcome, then unions, it might be really useful for politicians who fall on the left side of the aisle to put their thumb on the scales in favor of unions. If you are a marginal worker who enjoys getting paid for doing less work, then trying to get really productive employees to reduce their productivity down to your level so you don't look so bad, then it might be useful to you. But quite frankly, I'm less concerned about unions than I am about government putting their thumb on the scales of the outcome between management and the labor force. I like a free market where buyers and sellers of labor, i.e. employers and employees, have a private conversation where the door is closed and the government is not part of that conversation, deciding on what they're going to charge for their labor and what the employer is going to pay for that labor. Where I get concerned is where the Federal Labor Relations Board comes in and says, no, Boeing, we're not going to allow you to move your plant to South Carolina because you have a better workforce in South Carolina that's willing to charge less for labor, and making it illegal for Boeing to do what's in the best interest of airplane buyers or local communities. So yes, it's possible that unions are really useful for politicians. And yes, unions might be really useful to marginal productive employees. But by and large, I don't want to see unions forced out of the marketplace. I just don't want to see them get overwhelming support from the federal government.
In Amazon's case, is that unions are absolutely useful because for a long time, Amazon has had serious safety issues. And they've also had serious working condition issues where, people are having to use the restroom in a plastic bottle in order to make up their quota so they don't get fired. And so, employees have had, complained about this, and Amazon has put temporary patches on the problem, only to remove those patches and create the same unsafe, poor working conditions. And it basically got to a point where their employees got sick of it and said, hey, you know what? Instead of quitting, we're going to make this, quitting would be the best case scenario for Amazon because then they don't have to deal with it anymore. They can just keep doing what they had been doing in the past. So instead, what their employees says that, hey, instead of us just quitting, we're going to make this really hurt. We're going to form a union. And now you have to deal with all the headaches that comes with the union. So I think this is Amazon's doing. I mean, is that if you can't treat your employees well, that you're going to force them to do something. And if enough of them quit, that's going to be one thing for you. But if they all get together and decide to use the tools that are available to them and form a union, then you had this coming to you. I don't necessarily think in all cases unions are certainly useful. And you said, have they ever been useful? And yes, I mean, unions gave us the weekend. And I don't know, what date exactly, but people used to work in some pretty bad conditions before they started to unionize and demand better working conditions. And since then, I think it's evolved into something that is not as useful or has even been hurtful, especially in the education field where you keep bad teachers employed. And so I'm certainly not in support of that. But yes, there was a time when unions absolutely were useful. And in the case of Amazon, I mean, it's useful to the employees because they've been complaining about working conditions for a long time. Amazon refused to listen, and they basically got what was coming to them. So I'm not in support of unions, but in this case, the employees were basically sick of it and used the tools that were available and to tell Amazon, hey, we want to be treated better. We're not just going to quit. We're going to make you deal with it. All right, we'll move on to the devil's advocate round of Farm to Market. President Biden is purported to be seriously considering student loan forgiveness. Do you think that the government should forgive student loans?
Well, from what I've read, it sounds like an up to $50,000 per borrower kind of a thing, which probably would wipe out most or all of most borrowers' student loan debts. I'll start off by saying that in general, it's probably bad policy to do this unless there are certain conditions that are met. Because if you just do this on a one-off basis, then pretty much every time there's a new president, somebody's gonna get in the president's ear and say, hey, let's cancel student loan debt again. Let's cancel student loan debt again. And the end result will only be that college educations are going to get even more exorbitantly priced than they already are. If you were to do something like a one-off debt wipeout for all the federally backed student loan debt, and the caveat is the federal government gets out of the student loan debt business forever, I think I'd probably take that deal, especially since it would have been better had they done it under the guise of COVID instead of waiting this long. And the reason I say that is instead of just throwing money at every household, what you could have done is for about the same price, about $1.5 trillion, taken people in the 25 to 40-year-old age bracket. These are the people who are buying houses and cars. They're starting families. This is your prime consumer age population. And the average student loan is between $300 and $500 payment per month. So if you have a two adult household, you're talking about $600 to $1,000 a month in your prime consumer age demographic that you free up, not just on a one-off basis on a monthly, but for years and possibly even decades to come. If you wanted to get a real stimulus, that would have been it. Instead, they basically showered banks and financial companies with even more money, threw money at people who didn't need it, and paid people not to work and closed everything. I would have rather seen this done under COVID, even if that was just an excuse. Again, in general, it's probably bad policy to do this unless you get the feds out of the student loan game altogether. But if we have to pick between one kind of stimulus or another, making your prime consumer age population continue to service debt versus free that debt up so that they can actually buy things and generate real economic activity, I think that would be a reasonable enough argument in favor of it.
So the majority of federal student loan debt is held by professionals with master's and doctorate degrees, 55% to be exact, according to the latest data. 85% of the federal student debt is held by those that hold at least a bachelor's degree. Now, 2/3 of Americans don't hold any type of degree. So in that sense, a degree is still pretty elite in the workforce and held by those on average that are probably doing pretty well financially. So what this policy is doing is it's taking the plumber, the retail worker, or the Waffle House cook who may have made the wise financial decision to enter the workforce instead of college, and it's forcing them to pay the bill for the people with college degrees that probably didn't think twice about the implications of taking out huge sums of debt in the first place. To paraphrase Ronald Reagan, you get more of what you subsidize and less of what you penalize. If the federal government thinks that this will solve the student debt crisis and it continues to subsidize student debt, then they're only going to have more of the same problem. It's like, hey, my house is on fire. Oh, don't worry, the government will throw some gasoline on it. They think they're helping people, but they're actually ending up destroying lives. Students can't get private loans to get degrees in outdoor education because the lender recognizes the bad nature of that investment, but the federal government will say, yeah, that's a good idea, and here's the money. It's like me telling my 2-year-old daughter she can't eat a box of Pixie Sticks before bedtime, and then someone else comes in and gives her a whole box of Pixie Sticks and then just leaves. My daughter initially got what she wanted, but I'm unhappy because it derailed her bedtime process, and eventually my daughter will have a stomach ache from too much candy. So not a good thing. Kind of like what Alex said, I think the best solution is to dismantle the federal student loan program. Let private lenders or universities give out loans where the loan is underwritten properly and it's not backed by people wanting nothing to do with it.
You know, one thing I've learned over the years is that buying votes can be incredibly expensive. And this is really what this is. This is an unflinching play to buy votes from a cohort of voters who tend to vote overwhelmingly for the Democrats. Is that what you have here is a situation where if you take all of the statistics, people with master's degree and professional degrees overwhelmingly tend to vote for the blue ticket. Working class people who don't go to college generally don't. I can tell you right now, if the vast majority of recipients of student loans were conservative, we would not see this push today. In fact, in highly contested elections, you're not seeing anybody wanting to stick their neck out on this student loan thing. It's primarily the Democrats are pushing hard for executive action because they want the president to do a Hail Mary play right before the midterm elections. To Drew's point is that it's like throwing gasoline on a burning house to try to put it out, is that where is the money going to come from to pay $50,000 per student for student loan debt? We don't have the money to do it. So what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to print more dollars, put even more money into the economy to clean up the balance sheet. And the outcome is going to be even higher inflation. This is a really, really bad long-term play to try to solve a short-term election problem. But ultimately, the people who are going to be hurt the most are the people who got interpretive dance degrees, whose student loans cannot be serviced with their chosen professions. And as a result, now they can't afford houses, they can't afford cars, they can't afford groceries, or even gasoline, because the value of whatever marginal incomes they're making is not enough to pay their bills, even if their student loans are now absent.
All right, as the devil's advocate, this doesn't necessarily represent my opinion, but I'm gonna go ahead and try this argument on like I try on a fancy hat, and I want you to tell me how it looks on me. So I guess I had my points ordered here, but just because Joe talked about how we're gonna pay for it, I'll start with that. And that number one is that by paying off student loans, you're basically going to it's one way to stimulate the economy. So number one is that you pay off everybody's student loan, and then you have a bunch of doctors and teachers that aren't saddled with debt that can go out and buy other goods and services that'll eventually come back into the economy. The other way that you could do this is that there was an estimated $1.8 billion of frivolous projects in the government last year alone. In one quarter last year, the government spent about $200,000 on bottled water and ended up with about $800,000 a year on bottled water alone. So if I'm President Biden, I want to pay off student loan debt. The first thing I would do is start cutting. If you want to show up to Congress, bring your own bottled water. You want to bring your own paper, or you want to write something down, bring your own paper. There's a lot of things in the government that could be cut to pay for this. I don't know if it stands to be seen if he wants to cut social programs, but if you're basically not enforcing the law, protecting the country, and protecting people's rights, there's a lot of government programs that you could start shopping if you want to pay for student loan forgiveness. Just like when people have to make budget decisions, if you want to pay for Netflix, if you want to go out for dinner, you have to make sacrifices in other areas. And if the government decides that they want to pay off student loans, and they want this to be a priority for them, then do it. But you have to cut it from other parts of the government. And there's probably enough waste out there where they can make up quite a bit of it. So if they want to do about $1.6 trillion in student loan repayments, they make one sweeping payment, and then they spend about 10 to 15 years paying that back. And then once they do that, they could probably budget for at least $1.8 billion of student loan repayment per year just by giving up frivolous spending from the government. The second thing is that the precedence has already been set. Is that you've already bailed out banks, you already bailed out airlines, you bailed out the entire U.S. economy during the pandemic. You don't really have a leg to stand on when you're like, why shouldn't we bail out student loans? You've already bailed out everything else. It's just like when I'm in the kitchen, helping myself to some chocolate chips out of the pantry, and my daughter shows up. I have a real hard time telling her, no, you can't have chocolate chips, honey, when I'm not supposed to have them myself. And then my son shows up and I got to give him some too, because nobody's supposed to be having chocolate chips. And that's essentially what happens, that the pantry's already been raided, and you can't really tell one group, no, we're not going to bail you out, when you've already bailed out banks and airlines and pretty much everybody who had to stay home from work during a pandemic. So those are a couple of reasons why I think you could pay off why they should pay off student loans or forgive them.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, were you saying 1.8 billion or trillion?
Billion, so billion with a B. So I understand that's a drop in a bucket compared to the $1.6 trillion price tag that the student loan forgiveness would replenish. But like I said, is that given 10 to 15 years, you pay that back. And then after that, you basically have a merit-based program in which you forgive about 1.6 or $1.8 billion worth of student loans per year, and you make that merit-based program. So you got like doctors that are gonna go work in underserved areas. Great, give them give them part of that 1.8 billion. 15 years in the future. You got teachers that want to go serve in urban Chicago or something like that. Then great, then they can have part of that 1.8 billion to forgive their student loans. And like I said, it wouldn't, you'd have to basically, forgive everybody's student loans now and then pay it back over a 15-year period. And then in the future, you basically have a merit-based loan forgiveness program that would hopefully be better than the one that they're currently running.
I want to thank Tom for taking one for the team and volunteering to be the devil's advocate on this one, because this was a difficult one to be the devil's advocate on, particularly for everybody who's doesn't have any student loans in this office. But first off is that the ability to cut government waste for the purpose of funding other forms of government waste. Who are the constituents who are going to willingly give up the government waste that was used to buy their votes in order to go buy a different cohort of votes? That's the real issue here, is that a lot of the things that you use as examples, well, we'll just slash that particular one off the balance sheet and we'll move those funds over to this side of the docket to pay for this. It's not going to happen because they've already bought votes with those dollars. They're not going to give up those votes in order to get new votes. And then secondly, is that the whole thing about, well, we've already bailed out the airlines. That's the tu quoque fallacy, or the U2 fallacy, is that two wrongs don't make a right. Is that just because we messed up in a heroic fashion in the past, that doesn't give us the moral authority to continue to make bad decisions in the future.
In your analogy, Tom, do you think that you should continue to buy chocolate chips and then tease your kids that there might be chocolate chips you're going to be munching on in days to come?
In my analogy, I continue to buy chocolate chips and then just do a better job at eating them when nobody's around. And to Joe's point is that, like you said, you've already bought the votes, but I mean, you got to think of it, what's going to give you more votes? The social programs that you're already running, or if you pay off, what is it like? I can't remember. It's some staggering. Is it like 55 million people or something like that are going to get loan forgiveness? That's a lot of 55 million votes. I mean, that say, hey, thanks for the money, I'll vote for you. That's a huge chunk of people. So yeah, I mean, if I'm the president and I need votes, I'm like, it's the government too. So I'm sure, stabbing people in the back and throwing them under the bus, that's nothing new. So if you're trying to get, 55 million votes on your belt by midterm, that would be one way to do it.
Yeah.
Airtight argument. So no.
Yeah. You did a good job.
All right. All right. We'll move on to the lightning round. All right. Netflix reportedly lost 200,000 subscribers in the first quarter for 2022 and is expected to lose more than 2 million in the second quarter. Is Netflix dying on the vine, or is something else happening?
I don't think it's dying on the vine yet, but I think Netflix as we know it is probably finished. Netflix in the past has relied very heavily on licensing other people's content and streaming it. And as pretty much every content producer now has their own streaming service, they're going to be transitioning themselves, because they have no choice, either to producing their own higher quality original programming and possibly get into sports streaming rights like Amazon has already, or they are going to find themselves in a first to worst situation.
I don't think they're dying on the vine, but I don't see them growing and increasing their market share a whole lot. There's so many other good products out there that people have, a bunch of alternatives to choose from. And quite frankly, if you don't like Netflix, never have, you're not going to buy it now. Everyone who likes Netflix pretty much already subscribes.
I I think that they're not going to get a whole lot bigger, and they're probably going to get smaller. They've alienated at least half the population with their extremely expensive exclusive content. They have a message and a worldview that they try to impress upon their subscribership, of which at least half of their viewers find repulsive. You know, I think people would rather watch old reruns of Leave It to Beaver and Seinfeld rather than some woke message documentary where they spent $1 bazillion. And folks are saying, I'm sick and tired of paying top dollar for garbage when all these other people at least will allow me to watch the things I want to watch. So I think that their days of growth are over.
I think Netflix is getting disrupted in the industry by the industry that it disrupted. So when Netflix first came out, I mean, they were disrupting the cable industry, and now the cable industry has basically come back with a vengeance, taken all that money that they had and developed their own streaming services, and now they're disrupting Netflix. So Netflix has some serious issues that they need to take to correct themselves. Also, Joe's right, is that they do have a message. A lot of the stuff, a lot of these seemingly innocent shows are laced with all kinds of profanity and stuff like that isn't necessarily suitable for young children. It makes it kind of hard to watch, and those would be two reasons why I think they're losing subscribers.
Well, I know we're on the lightning round, but when it comes to Netflix, years ago when it first came out, you could actually watch movies you wanted. But now the movies you want aren't necessarily available on Netflix, but there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of movies that are available that you don't want to watch. And it's just getting harder and harder to find content you like. And the stuff you do like, it's on there for 2 years and it's off and you don't see it again.
Yeah. And I will say, also, Jonathan, prolonging this, but this is happening in other industries. Like Robinhood was a disruptor in 2020, and now Robinhood is getting disrupted by Schwab and Vanguard and Fidelity. They're basically eating their lunch right now. So it's kind of interesting how the disruptors are kind of taking the shorts a couple of years later. All right, moving on is that Jason Gay of the Wall Street Journal thinks that we are at a low point for dynasties in pro sports. For example, the Yankees used to be the team to beat for most of the 1950s and the late 1990s. In hockey, it was Montreal and Toronto for a long time. And in the NFL, recently had New England, and in the 90s, they had Buffalo. Even though Buffalo never actually won a Super Bowl, they were there for like 5 years in a row or something like that. Hence the term, cave like the Buffalo Bills in the Super Bowl. Do you think it helps or hurts pro sports when there's no one team that is far superior to the others?
Well, from a fan standpoint, it's been pretty fantastic. This is the result of decades of deliberate policy from the various sports leagues, whether it's luxury taxes for teams that spend more than a certain amount on players, or hard salary caps that actually limit what you can spend on total salaries for your team, and otherwise just policies that want to make parity within these leagues the reality of the sport. So if you're a fan of, say, like the Kansas City Royals or the Tampa Bay Rays in baseball, or some other small market team in any of these leagues, it's fantastic because you can compete with bigger market teams, because the leagues are trying to make sure that every fan base has a reason to watch. I mean, if you expect your team to lose 100 games a year in baseball, I mean, why would you ever watch your favorite team? From the league standpoint, it hasn't seemed to hurt either. The TV rights deals just keep getting more and more lucrative. Though I do think that there is some nostalgia not for me, I'm a Houston sports fan, but for like the era of the Dallas Cowboys in the 90s, people like watching great teams win for long periods of time. And so you probably lose a little bit there, but from the fan standpoint, for the most part in the leagues, everybody seems to be winning. I
don't watch any professional sports, but just from the quick lesson I learned about dynasties a few seconds ago, I like the idea of sports dynasties. I think everyone likes to see a hero fall. It makes the pursuit of a win and the eventual win that much more satisfying. So I think having a Goliath out there is good for both the fans and the players.
I don't think having a dynasty makes a whole bunch of difference these days, because any future growth in professional sports is not going to be feeding the American sports entertainment consumer. It's going to be the international sports entertaining consumer. I don't know that the Chinese or the European subscribers to some of these programs who watch American sports really have their dynasty, favorite teams. I think they just like watching Americana on TV.
Anything they could do to make the sports like baseball more competitive is okay with me. Is that in the when I was growing up, is that everybody during hockey, if during the hockey season, if your team was eliminated, hockey fans would stick around just to watch hockey for the sake of hockey. But in baseball, if the Yankees got beat, you're looking at a huge part of the market would basically just not watch the Major League Series. So the fact that the baseball is becoming more competitive is interesting, even if your team is not in there, is okay with me. All right, last question is that when it comes to chicken eggs, some chickens can produce what are known as Easter eggs, brightly colored eggs other than the standard brown or white eggs. The downside is that they only lay a few of those eggs per month or year. Whether the chickens lay brown eggs or white eggs, chickens that lay brown eggs or white eggs produce a far greater quantity each month or year, whichever period you want to look at. Would you rather have a few pretty eggs from your chickens, or would you have a lot of boring brown and white eggs?
Me personally, I'd probably take the pretty eggs. Boring brown and white eggs are dirt cheap at the grocery store, so I can get as many of them as I want. If I was gonna go with chickens, I would want something that's at least interesting.
I've eaten a lot of pretty eggs and a lot of ugly eggs. And when you scramble them or fry them, they all look the same. And in fact, they taste the same too. I don't care.
Overwhelmingly, I support the idea of buying high quantity brown and white egg laying eggs. And that's why at my house, we have pretty egg layers.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you want. Like we lucked out when we bought our house. It came with chickens, and we have one that lays blue eggs, and then the rest are just brown eggs. So, we really have the best of both worlds. We have a couple of high producing chickens, and then we have one that shoots out a couple nice eggs, and we got a nice quantity. So I'd say do both. Just get one chicken that lays nice eggs, and then you have a bunch of normal chickens that do all the production for you.
Sounds like, Dad, you have a classic Coco household compromise.
Yes.
Mom wants pretty eggs. You want mass ugly eggs, so you compromise and do pretty eggs.
True statement.
I will say is that I do like your white barn better than if you went with red. Because you painted your barn white, right?
Well, I did. It was funny when we first got our first chickens. And I sent Linda to Murdoch's, the ranch and farm supply place here in our area. I said, now when you get down there, talk to the manager and tell him that you want the chickens that have the highest production. So when she came home with our 8 first chicks, I said, what brand did you get? And she said, the one where the manager said they lay the prettiest eggs.
Nice. All right. That's it for episode 37 of Farm to Market. So see you next week.